The boy with the golf club. We've walked through the contaminated crime scene. We've examined the ransom note that reads like fiction. We've traced the DNA that was supposed to exonerate but only raise more questions. We've sat with the pineapple, that small domestic detail that quietly dismantles the family's timeline. But there's a presence in this case that keeps appearing in the evidence while fading from the narrative. A presence whose fingerprints are on the tea glass, whose DNA is on the nightgown found in the basement, whose history includes a prior incident severe enough to require medical intervention. We need to talk about Burke Ramsey. Not to accuse, not to convict, but to understand. Because when you examine the evidence, all of it, not just the pieces we're comfortable with, and that pattern requires us to ask questions that are deeply uncomfortable. What if the person responsible wasn't an adult with premeditated intent? What if it was a child whose emotions overwhelmed him in a moment he couldn't take back? What if the elaborate staging, the ransom note, the decades of legal maneuvering? Act 1. The golf club incident. Let's go back to 1993, 3 years before JonBenet was lost. The Ramsey family is at their summer house in Charlevoix, Michigan. It's a beautiful property on the water, a place where the family goes to escape Boulder's routines, to relax, to spend time together away from John's business demands. Burke is 6 years old. JonBenet is 3. And on one particular day, something happens that Patsy and John will later describe as an accident. Burke is outside, playing with a golf club, practicing his swing, the way kids do, mimicking adults, trying to figure out the motion, the coordination required to hit a ball cleanly. JonBenet is nearby, playing, watching, being a little sister, and Burke swings. The golf club connects with JonBenet. According to Patsy's account, it was a backswing. Burke didn't see her, didn't know she was there. The club came around and struck her. The injury was severe enough that Patsy took JonBenet to see a plastic surgeon. A plastic surgeon. Not just a family doctor for a checkup. Not just an ice pack and some reassurance. A plastic surgeon. A specialist you consult when you're concerned about scarring, about tissue damage. Patsy would later say the club hit JonBenet in the face, near her eye. That there was concern about how the injury would heal, whether it would leave a mark. But here's where the physics of that explanation start to break down. JonBenet was 3 years old. At that age, she would have been roughly 2 to 2.5 feet tall. Burke at 6 would have been around 4 feet tall. JonBenet was 1 foot to 1.5 foot shorter than her brother. Now picture the mechanics of a golf swing. When you take a backswing, the club goes up and back. It arcs behind you. If someone is standing directly behind you, especially someone significantly shorter, the backswing goes over their head. For a backswing to connect with someone shorter who's behind you, they'd have to be standing very close and in a very specific position. And even then, the angle of contact wouldn't be direct. It would be glancing upward. Patsy said Burke hit JonBenet in the face, near the eye. That suggests a horizontal or downward strike, not the upward arc of a backswing. Unless JonBenet was standing beside Burke, not behind him. Which means he could have seen her. Which means the didn't know she was there explanation doesn't hold. Or unless it wasn't a backswing at all. Unless it was a forward swing, a direct strike. We don't know for certain. We weren't there. But what we do know is this. The injury was severe enough for medical intervention. And Patsy and John's response was to frame it as an accident, to minimize it, to explain it in a way that removed any suggestion of intent. From a psychological standpoint, this matters. Because families develop patterns. They develop ways of handling conflict, of explaining violence, of protecting the narrative they want to believe about themselves. And the pattern that emerges from the golf club incident is one of minimization, of framing aggression as accident, of seeking medical help when necessary, but not addressing the underlying behavior. There's no indication Burke faced consequences. No mention of conversations about controlling his anger, about being more careful, about understanding that actions have effects on other people. It was an accident. These things happen. Move on. But what if it wasn't an accident? What if Burke, at 6 years old, was already showing signs of something his parents didn't want to acknowledge. A capacity for violence, a lack of impulse control, a difficulty managing emotions when his younger sister was getting attention, taking space, being present in ways that frustrated him. 3 years later, JonBenet would be gone, and Burke would be the person downstairs with her in the hours before it happened. The golf club incident doesn't prove anything about December 25, 1996, but it establishes a history, a pattern, a prior instance of Burke. And that history matters when we start piecing together what might have happened that night. Act 2. The night of December 25th, 26. Let's move forward to the night in question. December 25th, 1996. The family returns home from the Christmas party at Fleet and Priscilla White's house. According to John and Patsy, everyone goes to bed. Burke goes to his room. JonBenet is carried upstairs, still asleep. The house settles into quiet. That's the story. But Burke himself has contradicted it. In his 2016 interview with Dr. Phil McGraw, the first time Burke spoke publicly about the case as an adult, he admitted something significant. He said he didn't go straight to bed that night. He went downstairs, after his parents went to sleep, to play with a toy he'd gotten for Christmas, some kind of model or assembly kit. He wanted to finish putting it together. "How long were you downstairs?" Dr. Phil asked. Burke hesitated. "Just for a little bit. Just for a little bit." But his fingerprints are on the iced tea glass found in the breakfast nook. The glass that was completely empty. The glass found next to the bowl of pineapple that JonBenet ate within 30 to 45 minutes of her passing. So Burke was downstairs. He admits it, and the physical evidence confirms it. But was he alone? The pineapple in JonBenet's stomach says no. She was down there too, awake, eating, which means Burke's just for a little bit was actually time spent with his sister. Time that ended with JonBenet gone and Burke back in his bed, pretending to sleep when Fleet White tried to wake him the next morning. Now, there's another detail from that morning that's worth examining. When Fleet White went to Burke's room to check on him, this was after the 911 call, after police arrived, after the house started filling with people, almost unnaturally still. Was Burke genuinely asleep, deeply exhausted from the emotional and physical toll of whatever had happened hours earlier? Or was he pretending, lying still, eyes closed, trying to seem unconscious because he'd been told to stay in his room, to act like he'd slept through everything, to not come out until his parents said it was safe? We don't know, but the question lingers, because Burke's behavior throughout this case, from that first morning through interviews years later, someone who knows what to say, and more importantly, what not to say. Detective Patterson, one of the officers who spoke with Burke on December 26th, later said he believed Burke didn't do it. His reasoning? Burke seemed to be coming up with responses spontaneously. He didn't seem rehearsed. But here's the thing about coaching. Good coaching doesn't make someone sound robotic. It makes them sound natural. If you tell a 9-year-old, when they ask you questions, just say you don't know. Act confused. Laugh it off if it gets uncomfortable. Because they're not reciting a script. They're following a simple instruction. Deflect, minimize, act like you don't remember. And that's exactly what Burke did in his early interviews. Lots of "I don't know." Lots of shrugging. Lots of nervous laughter when questions got too specific. From a behavioral analysis standpoint, this isn't proof of innocence. It's evidence of coaching, of a child who's been told how to navigate questions without revealing anything. And the fact that Burke needed coaching, that his parents felt it necessary to prep him, to get him lawyers, to control his interactions with investigators from day one. Act 3. The physical evidence connecting Burke. Now let's look at the physical evidence that ties Burke to the crime scene in ways that require explanation. We've already discussed the tea glass, Burke's fingerprints, the glass completely drained. But there's more. The Barbie nightgown found in the basement, near JonBenet's body, shows something investigators initially struggled to explain. The nightgown had small amounts of urine on it. Fresh urine, not old stains from a previous wearing. It also had small amounts of blood. And it had Burke's DNA, touch DNA, found on multiple locations. The shoulders, the front, the bottom front. Burke could not be excluded as a contributor to that DNA. Now, according to Patsy, that nightgown was supposed to be in the laundry, in the washer or dryer. She'd planned to dress JonBenet in it for bed, but couldn't find it. But if it was in the laundry, if it had already been washed or was waiting to be washed, why does it have fresh urine and blood on it? And why does it have Burke's DNA? The most logical explanation is that the nightgown was recently worn or recently handled, that it was in contact with JonBenet that night, that Burke touched it for reasons we can only speculate about. But the family's timeline doesn't allow for that. Because if the nightgown was downstairs with JonBenet, and if Burke's DNA is on it, then Burke was involved in whatever happened in that basement. Unless, of course, the DNA transferred innocently. Secondary transfer, from laundry, from previous contact. But fresh urine, fresh blood, that suggests the nightgown was part of the scene that night, not a relic from days earlier. Then there's the flashlight. A Maglite flashlight was found on the kitchen counter the morning of December 26th. It had been wiped clean. No fingerprints. Investigators have long suspected this flashlight might have been the object used to strike JonBenet's head. The size, the shape, the weight, sign of blunt force. The skull fracture was massive, 8.5 inches long. The kind of injury that requires significant force. Could a 9-year-old generate that much force? If they were swinging something heavy, something with momentum, like a Maglite flashlight? Yes, absolutely. Especially if the swing came from a place of dissociative rage. The kind of emotional state where you're not thinking about consequences, not measuring force, just releasing anger until the moment passes. The flashlight was wiped clean. Why would an intruder wipe a flashlight, but leave a ransom note written in the house on the family's notepad? But if a family member used that flashlight, if it became a piece of evidence they needed to sanitize, then wiping it makes sense. And finally, there's the device found around JonBenet's neck. The ligature with the toggle stick. For years, this has been described as a garrote, a sophisticated tool used for strangulation. The assumption has been that an adult made it, that it required skill and knowledge beyond what a child would have. But when you actually look at the construction, it's simpler than that. It's a slip noose, a basic knot tied around a stick to create leverage. The kind of thing taught in Boy Scouts. And Burke was in Boy Scouts. It's entirely plausible that Burke made this device as a demonstration, a project. That it was sitting in his room or in a common area, already assembled. And that when something went wrong that night, when JonBenet was hurt, when panic set in, the noose was there, available, used, not as part of a premeditated plan, but as an object of opportunity in a moment of chaos. Episode 5, The Boy with the Golf Club. From a forensic standpoint, the device doesn't require adult sophistication. It requires basic knot-tying skills and a stick. Both things a 9-year-old in Boy Scouts would have access to. The question isn't whether Burke could have made it. The question is, why was it there? And how did it end up around JonBenet's neck? Act 4. The behavior. Let's talk about Burke's behavior in the years following JonBenet's passing. On December 26, 1996, when Detective Patterson interviewed him, Burke's effect was flat, emotionally distant. He answered questions in a way that seemed detached from the gravity of what had happened. Some people interpreted this as evidence of innocence. He's just a kid in shock, they said. He doesn't understand. But 9-year-olds understand when their sister is gone. They understand loss. They understand fear. What they don't always understand is how to hide guilt. In the interviews conducted in 1998, more than a year after JonBenet's passing, Burke's responses show clear signs of coaching. When asked about the pineapple, he deflects. When asked about that night, he says he doesn't remember. When pressed on details, he gives vague, non-committal answers. I don't know. Maybe. I'm not sure. These are the phrases of someone who's been told what not to say. Someone who understands that certain topics are dangerous, that certain admissions would unravel the narrative his family has constructed. And then there's the 2016 Dr. Phil interview. Burke Ramsey, now 29 years old, sits down for his first public interview about the case. It's meant to be an opportunity for him to tell his side of the story, to explain what it was like growing up under suspicion, to clear his name. But what emerges is unsettling. Throughout the interview, Burke smiles, not in moments of levity or relief. He smiles when discussing his sister's passing, when talking about the crime scene, when recounting the morning his family fell apart. It's an inappropriate effect, a disconnect between the content of the conversation and the emotional response. Dr. Phil, to his credit, asks about it. Why are you smiling? Burke's answer is vague. Nervous energy, he says. Discomfort. A coping mechanism. And maybe that's true. Trauma manifests in strange ways. People laugh at funerals. They smile when recounting horrible events. It's a defense mechanism, a way the brain tries to manage overwhelming emotion. But there's something else in Burke's demeanor during that interview. Something that suggests a person who's been telling the same story for so long that he no longer connects to the reality behind it. I just went back to bed, he says, describing the morning of December 26th, as if that's a normal thing to do when your house is full of police and your sister is missing. I just went back to bed. He repeats it, the same phrase he's been saying for 20 years. And in that repetition, you can hear the coaching, the script he's been given, the story he's supposed to tell. From a psychological perspective, Burke's behavior over the years is consistent with someone who experienced significant trauma at a young age and then spent decades being managed by adults who needed him to stay quiet. Dissociation, emotional flattening, rehearsed responses. These are the markers of a person who's learned to separate themselves from an event too painful or too dangerous to fully acknowledge. But they're also the markers of guilt, of a secret held so tightly for so long that it becomes part of the architecture of your personality. We can't know for certain what Burke feels. We can't read his mind or access his memories, but we can observe his behavior. And his behavior, the flat effect, the coached responses, the inappropriate smiling. And then there's the question of the lawyers. Burke Ramsey was 9 years old when JonBenet passed. 9. And from the very beginning, his parents hired him his own attorney. Not a family attorney who happened to represent all of them. A separate lawyer. Just for Burke. Why does an innocent 9-year-old need his own attorney? The standard explanation is that he needed protection from overzealous investigators. That the police might try to manipulate him, get him to say things that weren't true, use him as a pawn against his parents. But here's the thing. If Burke genuinely had no involvement, if he truly was asleep the whole night, if there was nothing for him to hide, innocent children don't need lawyers. They need comfort. They need stability. They need adults who will help them process grief and trauma. But guilty children, or children being protected because of what happened, they need lawyers. From the very first day, John and Patsy Ramsey made a choice. They chose to shield Burke behind legal protections that would keep investigators from asking him the hard questions. That would ensure his story remained consistent. That would prevent anyone from getting close enough to uncover what really happened. That's not the behavior of parents who believe their son is innocent. That's the behavior of parents who know he's not, and who are willing to do whatever it takes to protect him. Ending in. Burke Ramsey was 9 years old on the night JonBenet was lost. 9 years old. And we have to sit with that. Because it's deeply uncomfortable to consider that a child, someone who should be innocent, protected, free from the capacity for serious harm, might be responsible. But the evidence asks us to consider it anyway. Burke had a history of violence against JonBenet. The golf club incident wasn't a minor scrape. It was severe enough to require a plastic surgeon. And his parents framed it as an accident, minimized it, moved on without addressing the underlying behavior. Burke was downstairs that night. He admits it. His fingerprints confirm it. He was there, in the kitchen, in the breakfast nook, drinking tea while JonBenet ate pineapple. Within 30 to 45 minutes of that snack, JonBenet was gone. Burke's DNA is on the Barbie nightgown found in the basement with her body. A nightgown that had fresh urine and blood on it. A nightgown that wasn't where it was supposed to be. The device around JonBenet's neck is consistent with Boy Scout skills Burke would have learned. The flashlight on the counter, wiped clean of prints, is consistent with the kind of object that could cause the massive head injury documented in the autopsy. And from the moment this happened, Burke's parents hired him the best legal representation money could buy. Not to help the investigation, to protect him from it. They hired lawyers for him before his sister's body was even found. They refused to let him be interviewed by police for months. They controlled every aspect of his contact with investigators, ensuring that nothing he said could be used against him. Why? If Burke was innocent, if he truly had no involvement, no knowledge, no connection to what happened, why did he need that level of protection? The answer is uncomfortable, but it's the only answer that fits the pattern. Burke's parents knew, or suspected, or feared. They knew he was downstairs with JonBenet. They knew something happened between them. They knew that whatever it was, it ended with their daughter gone and their son terrified. And they made a choice, not to seek justice, not to find the truth, but to protect Burke, to stage a crime scene that would point away from him, to write a ransom note that would create an intruder narrative, to hire lawyers who would ensure he never had to answer the hard questions. For 29 years, that choice has held. Burke has lived his life under suspicion, yes. But he's lived. He's grown up. He's built a career. He's filed lawsuits against people who accused him and won settlements. All while the truth of what happened that night has remained locked behind legal walls and family silence. We can't say with absolute certainty what Burke did or didn't do. We weren't there. We didn't see. But we can say this. The evidence points to him. The timeline involves him. The physical markers connect him to the scene in ways that can't be explained by innocent presence. And his parents' behavior, their immediate legal response, their refusal to cooperate, their decades of protecting him. In the next episode, we're going to walk through what might have actually happened that night. Not with certainty, not with claims of absolute truth, but with the evidence as our guide. We're going to piece together a timeline that makes sense of the pineapple, the DNA, the staging, the ransom note. A timeline that accounts for Burke being downstairs, for JonBenet joining him, for something going terribly wrong. And we're going to examine the psychology of what happens when parents discover their child has done something unthinkable. How far would you go to protect your child? What lies would you tell? What narrative would you construct? What evidence would you hide? Jon and Patsy Ramsey answered those questions on the night of December 25th, 1996. And the answers they gave have shaped this case ever since. The boy with the golf club grew up, but the truth of what he did when he was 9 years old is still waiting, still buried under layers of staging and lies and legal maneuvering. And it's time to bring it into the light,